Jamie Hawkesworth, welcome to SHOWstudio.
Thanks.
First question, it's a difficult one. What makes a great fashion photograph?
Yeah, it's tricky. I guess a good fashion photo should probably feel quite timeless, and maybe it can kind of live and breathe outside the context of fashion in a way. So it doesn't necessarily need the context of a fashion shoot to feel like a great photograph. That makes sense.
It does make sense. It's interesting to me because when I was researching you for this, a lot of the stuff that's written about your photographs is that they're sort of real or raw in some way. Often you shoot people in sort of everyday settings, or you go and find people, you know, in their hometowns or what have you. But I was interested in how you use the fashion, because actually the clothing often doesn't look that real. Often they look like they're wearing a costume.
Yeah.
And I was interested in how you see fashion and why you work in that way.
To begin with, I did spend an awful lot of time going to places and spending time in places and taking portraits of people just as they were, and I appreciated, you know, an interesting haircut or you know, the way that they stood or anything like that. But then once I started doing fashion, and I did a shoot for Man About Town with Benjamin Bruno, and it always stood out as a sort of moment for me of understanding how interesting fashion could be, because, you know, it was fantastic to, you know, basically we took a bag of clothes to Newcastle, and you know, it was just me and Ben, and as we found people, we dressed them, and it was interesting because I would see someone that visually just stood out to me as they were, but then, you know, Ben might, you know, there's a picture of a kid that we dressed in a blue, I think it was a Calvin Klein suit, and it was a fantastic moment where I realised you could take someone that's already quite interesting and then elevate their character to something that you might not even be able to imagine to begin with. So that always stood out as a moment where I kind of understood the potential of what fashion can bring to a person, I guess.
Because often you're putting them in clothes that maybe aren't even akin to their style. Like the girl in the blue suit, there's such a tension because she's young, but then she almost looks like this.
Yeah, she was wearing before we put the suit on, she was wearing like a flowery dress.
Yeah.
Literally, you know, that's what she was wearing. So it was the polar opposite of what that was. But then that was kind of really interesting, because I think with fashion, there's always, I think, the more sort of tension there is, and something, I always think that it's really fantastic to have something to kind of push against. So I think with fashion, that naturally happens because, you know, I guess it's you know, it's unfamiliar to see that girl wearing that blue suit, so it's kind of visually an interesting experience to, you know, to try and articulate.
Would you say that you like fashion?
What, as a way of taking photos?
Yeah, I'm interested. Are you interested in clothes? Do you like working within that medium?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like I said, it breeds an opportunity to have something to push against and to explore your creativity. And, you know, like I said before that, it was always about me being by myself, taking portraits of people, you know, in a very kind of simple, I guess, quite naive way. So, you know, when fashion comes along, it is difficult, and sometimes it's quite hard to, you know, when you don't necessarily, because I think what's really important is when you work with a stylist, you're very much on the same page. So, you know, I appreciate their sensibility and they appreciate mine, and then you can create something that's sort of harmonious. Or, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be harmonious in the classical sense, but you both understand what you're trying to do. So in that respect, you know, I really like fashion.
And talk to me a bit, because I think your aesthetic at the moment is popular, and you've ushered in this kind of movement, you and maybe a couple of other photographers, but you especially, you know, film, there's this sort of purity, this sort of knowing awkwardness. And how would you describe the feeling of your pictures? Like, I just used a few words then, but maybe you disagree.
The feeling of it. That's a good question. Well, I mean, I tried to approach it in a very honest very honest way, you know, as in I don't try and overthink anything, and it kind of sort of, you know, I really enjoy, I think it's very important to talk a lot about stuff to the stylist as well, and like, you know, understand that we're both, like I say, both trying to do the same thing. So I guess I'd like to think they're quite honest. An honest aesthetic, I guess. I don't know.
And they have this, I do think there's a naivety to some of them, particularly in the way that some of the subjects hold themselves. And often to me they seem to be about youth, even if the people you're shooting aren't necessarily, I know you shoot a lot of young people, but I'm interested, do you think that there is something sort of, does that relate to yourself? You know, you're a very young photographer, you know, for a long time you were sort of, you know, you're shooting big fashion images when you were like 26, 27. Like, is there something autobiographical about your work? I'm not saying that you're an awkward person, but...
I think, I guess because like I said about, you know, fashion can sometimes feel quite unfamiliar, that you naturally as a photographer, you kind of draw from what it is that you've built over time. So, you know, as I spent so much time photographing youth, and you know, obviously I spent a lot of time at Preston photographing the people at the bus station. So essentially I'm always, I guess, you know, because that is so, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's so natural for me to do that, as in to be by myself as a photographer with my camera, approaching people that I really think are great. So when you're in a situation where, you know, you have people around you, you have hair and makeup, you know, all that kind of stuff, I think you naturally draw from what it is that you've built, like I say, what you've built over time, and your foundation of your sensibility to stuff. So I guess, you know, I think my sensibility was built a lot from the people and the nuances and stuff that I appreciated as in something as a simple place as Preston. So naturally that kind of comes through, maybe.
But you don't see yourself reflected in your pictures?
I don't think so. No, I don't, not me. Well, I guess that is me. My sensibility is me. So I guess, in a way, yeah, I guess. But, you know, as in everything that I love about the world is in the stuff that is in the sensibility that was built over time. So I guess, yeah, I guess it probably does in a way.
And would you say you have, what is sort of your idea of beauty?
My idea of beauty. I think it's just I'd like to think it's a kind of open appreciation of any possibility, any possible kind of beauty in a very natural way. As in, I kind of try and don't like I say, I don't sort of overthink what I find beautiful. I just kind of feel it, and if it feels right, then it should hopefully come across. But I don't kind of have a set rule of what I think is beautiful. It's just, I think it's important to feel quite open. You know, what I always loved about traveling so much was the openness of being just with your camera and not kind of knowing what's going to come around the corner. You know, it's like the story that me and Ben did that stood out for me. You know, we went not knowing at all who we were going to shoot, and you know, we could have gone up there and not found anyone, which happens all the time. You know, I've done stuff in the past where I've gone away for a week and not really found anyone at all. But I think it's the openness of allowing that kind of things, that kind of stuff to happen. Then, you know, or any kind of beauty can creep in to your photo, I guess.
You mentioned Preston. I want to go back and sort of talk about your life and growing up, and even before you went to Preston. So do you come from a creative family? What were you like as a boy?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think there wasn't necessarily. I mean, I guess what's creative, but there wasn't. You know, there wasn't a lot of art books around, or you know, we didn't go to galleries and shows and stuff like that. But you know, my mum and dad are, you know, kind of creative in all kinds of ways, you know. But so I guess that kind of probably seeped through somehow, you know. But like I say, not in a classical sense of appreciating art, so to speak. So, and I didn't really like art at school at all. I didn't quite understand what the point of it was.
What were you like when you were at school?
I think I was quite academic in a way, as in I tried quite hard in, biology and, stuff like that.
Were you popular?
I used to be called Big Ears a lot.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Jamie,
they were always the same size as now, so if you imagine my head much smaller. So, but then once my head grew a bit bigger, they were normal, so then I stopped being called Big Ears and I got along with people, I think.
And what were your ambitions? What did you want to, because you studied forensic sciences when you went to university, so when you were pre-university, when you were getting to that age where you're thinking about a job, imagine taking pictures wasn't something you thought about? No,
not at all. I mean, I wanted to be a geography teacher for a long time. And then from there, I then got really interested in science, and then I failed my maths course, I failed maths, and I wanted to go to a better sixth form. So I retook my maths, and then I got into a better sixth form, and then I studied psychology and biology there, and that led to forensic science.
So would you say you were aesthetically minded at all? Like, were you interested in what you wore? Did you look at pictures ever? Like, were you intrigued? Because you seem so intrigued by people now. Like, did you look at people? And
No, not at all. It was never no. I sometimes think back, like, what was I thinking? Like, what did I spend my days thinking about? Because now I am a photographer and I spend an awful lot of time thinking about photography and art and stuff like that and appreciating it. I kind of think, what the hell was I thinking? What was I spent my time thinking about? But it was just never that at all. So when funnily enough, I wanted to do forensic science because I was doing psychology and biology, so it kind of made sense, but it was like watching Seven that made me want to, do you know what I mean? It was quite, in a way, it was sort of a basic push because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Yeah.
Do you think there's something, it seems like in some ways there's those kind of mundane routines of being young. Are they something that, whether consciously or not, continue to inform your photographs though? It seems like you're not particularly interested in the epic, it's more these kind of routines and these like day-to-day people and places that interest you. Maybe is that reflecting back on that time?
I don't think so, but maybe. But I think that kind of appreciation came from more that when photography did come around, and when I swapped to photography after kind of discovering it in forensic science, that I very quickly kind of fell in love. I really, really enjoyed taking photographs, so I always felt quite guilty when I wasn't taking pictures, as in I kind of I found something that I really love doing, so I'm going to spend every second that I possibly can doing it. So the most accessible thing to do would be to go outside and take photographs. It's different if you need to book a studio or you want to go to the college studio to use the equipment. That takes a lot of time, like booking stuff in or whatever. So the way that getting outside and photographing people and photographing places, what I always felt was the best possible way to use my time now that I found something I really love doing.
And you'd never felt before like there was something you really loved doing?
No, not at all.
So tell me about the move, because you did forensic science for like a year, and then did you fail or did you just change?
So the course was kind of cut up into two halves. It was very practical on one side and very law-based on the other. So the practical side, they had Preston bought a whole street and they made it into kind of mock crime scene houses, which was really fantastic. But on the other side, you would sit and you'd sit in a big hall with 250 people and you would learn law, which was terrible. And none of it was kind of going in at all. So I failed my law exam, and they asked me to come back during the summer to retake the law exam. And I knew that I tried as hard as I possibly could to pass it. So I thought, this is completely pointless. And I just sort of sat down and thought, well, what do I like about the course? And it was, when you go into all the mock crime scene houses and gather evidence, you would then just document it with a camera. So it was it was digital and it was very basic, but it was like, oh, this is an interesting way to use photography, rather than, say, taking a picture of, I don't know, your mate at the bowling alley or something. So it was like it was a brand new way of seeing, you know, the way that photography was used, and I liked using my hands and using my hands with an object to then make something else. So it was kind of, I was like, oh, I've never explored this at all, and very quickly I kind of really did fall in love with doing that. So,
and how come they let you do it? Because they let
you
into the course, didn't they?
So I quit the forensics course and I run the photography course at Preston. I don't know why I did that, in that I could have probably tried to call any, but I guess it was so unfamiliar that I kind of just went with what seemed the most simplest route. So I called the university and I spoke to a guy called John Aiken, who's the head of the course, and I was very honest with him. I said, I've been doing a forensic science course, I really don't like it. You know, basically what I just said about you starting to use cameras, and he said, do you have a portfolio? And I said, no, I don't have anything. And he said, well, spend the next 2-3 weeks building a portfolio of things that you like and people that you love, you know, is what he said, and come up for an interview. So that's what I did.
What did you take pictures of?
I photographed my nan, my skateboard, some graffiti.
Do you still have those pictures?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Are they
my
terrible?
friend, my best mate at the time, actually, he studied photography at Norwich University, and he kind of helped me a lot. He sent me a picture that I gave to him of, it was basically of a car, and in the reflection of a car was a man, and that man was graffiti. So he has that, anyway. But
so you were into skateboarding then?
Yeah.
Were you good?
No, not at all. But I really loved it. I really enjoyed doing it a lot. I did it for like 4 years. I've still got my skateboard, but I haven't been out on it for a long time. I'd probably, because when you're younger, you can fall down. Now I've got such a bad back that I'd probably not get back up.
Not be able to get back up.
Yeah.
So it's interesting though that you took pictures of your nan and your skateboard, and just these kind of, like, it's kind of similar to how you take pictures today, I think. It's like,
not if you saw them, but I guess in a way it was, well, I don't think so, but it was stuff that was around.
Yeah.
And I had this digital camera that had about 1 million different settings, so I didn't know what the hell I was doing really. But I think what really stood out for the course was that I came across a book. I think my friend gave it to me, I can't quite remember, it was called Shots from the Hip by a guy called Johnny Stiletto.
Yeah.
And he basically travelled, I mean, it was a little bit, I guess he was kind of doing what Walker Evans did, in the sense that he was shooting from his hip on trains. I know that Walker Evans, he did a project where he photographed people sitting in trains, but it was waist level, and he hid it intentionally. But anyway, so I really loved, but I didn't know of Walker Evans then. I just came across this Johnny Stiletto book that kind of was really interesting. So when I went for the interview, I kind of banged on about how interesting I thought this book was. And they let me start in the second year of the course, which was fantastic for financial. You know, I didn't have to do another year. So I did 2 years of photography. And
what point did you realise you were good? And what point did anyone else realise you were good?
I don't know about realising I was good, but I realised I realised I found something that I loved, which is half the battle, I think. I think I mean straight away I kind of knew that as soon as I started the course, and as soon as I kind of, you know, got my, became into the, spent time with the teachers and stuff, and the cameras, I quickly realised that, you know, because I couldn't stop myself from talking about it, from thinking about it, from, you know, doing it. So I knew that it was I found something that I'd loved. So
it's interesting. Do you think it brought out a more, when you talk about your upbringing, it sounds like you were quite relaxed, and, you know, you were almost not particularly passionate. And would you say it brought out a slight obsessive side in you, or an intensity that maybe? No,
definitely, yeah.
And is that what you're like today, do you think? Are you quite obsessive about what you're doing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I try my very best, as in, of course, over time, it kind of, sometimes naturally, it kind of dips up and down your love for your craft, I guess, it kind of goes up and down. But yeah, no, I forgot your question. But
I asked if you were obsessive.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I still, love photography a lot. So I guess so.
And would you say you're ambitious? Do you look at, actually this is interesting, like who do you think your peers are right now, and do you look at them and...
I mean, I'd like to say I don't, but of course, as in I try, it's so easy to kind of get wrapped up in what other people do and what they're doing, and, I think that's just a natural human thing, I guess, I don't know. So I would like to say that I don't, but I kind of do, and yeah, I never try and think who are my peers and stuff like that, but I just kind of, naturally I kind of see what other people do, and I respect it, or I think, oh, I'm not sure about that. It's just a natural response. Yeah.
And would you say that you're competitive, like in the sense of, do you feel that what drives you is just that love for taking pictures, or is there now something else that's kicked in when you're part of an industry where there's a desire to achieve a certain level of something?
Yeah, I did there was a period where I was kind of, as you do, as you're trying to forge your career, I guess, as in build your work, and of course there's certain people that you want to work with because you respect their work, so you work hard, you look at the photographers that they are working with, and then you strive to to produce work that's just as strong, because then those people will want to work with you. So in that respect, I guess there naturally there is a competitiveness, because of, if you respect a magazine, then you look at the photographers that work in that magazine, and then you kind of want to strive to do work. So I guess in that respect, most definitely, I guess that yeah, because I guess naturally you want to, I think you don't want to kind of say, oh well, I'm competitive, but I think naturally you have to be a little bit.
And just going back, talk to me a little bit, you mentioned shots from the hip, but when you started studying photography, is that when you came across people who, I know that Nigel Shaffron's someone you've greatly admired, were there other photographers that you came across who really were quite formative for you when you saw their work?
Yeah, so I mean, when I was at uni, I started to use the library an awful lot, because again, it was this brand new, find, as in I didn't know any of these photographers, and I never appreciated anything like that, so it was like this incredible experience of coming across like Nigel's work, or people, there's so many, and it was fantastic, because it was like I'd never seen anything like it in all different, so it was like sort of feeding the mind very, it's like eating quickly, sort of like, it was really great. Yeah, so there's it's so hard to say.
There's so
it's
many.
Like, who's your favourite singer album? I don't know.
Yeah.
But Nigel was a guy that particularly, and I said earlier to you that I remember calling him up when I was at uni to try and assist him. But I very quickly found that kind of, I know that Nigel does do fashion as well, but I very much saw him as a documentary photographer, and I did call, who else did I call? I called a war photographer, an Irish guy, I've forgotten his name now, but I tried to call a lot of documentary photographers at the time, and nobody needed assistance. Nigel pretty much hung up on me. So so then I spoke to Adam, who was my tutor, who
Adam Murray.
And he recommended that I kind of, looked at fashion photographers because they need assistance. So I kind of, I kind of, in common sense, I didn't go for like the big photographers. I kind of was looking in magazines at photographers' work that I liked, who were doing kind of, because they in Preston Uni they had a whole section of magazines. So Adam was like, go and have a look and find photographers that you like. So there was a guy called Nick Hartley that I really liked at the time, and I gave him a call, and I gave so many people a call, and Nick was fantastic in that he said, well, come down to London and help me out. And I think at the time Nick was kind of just starting out, so it was a perfect opportunity for him to have a guy help him who, I didn't ask for any money, which then led to him letting me use his darkroom, and I learned to colour print, and so it was a really great, something as simple as just calling a photographer from a magazine.
So it wasn't a conscious choice to do fashion then, it was more just a practical...
Not at the beginning, no, not at all, because I didn't really know what it was. So it was like, we had a fashion module at the last year of at university, so of course I kind of got a better understanding of that. But I was calling people, I tried to assist people as soon as I got on the course pretty much. It was very quick that I thought it was, I spoke to Adam. So it wasn't, I never sat there and thought, right, I know I'm going to do fashion photography. It kind of just happened that way in a way.
Do you ever wish you were a documentary photographer?
I think I am still, because I do you can be, I always struggle with the idea of like, okay, well, I'm not me personally, but when you're doing work and you're like, well, this is fashion, this is documentary, this is personal. I never understood that. I always think it's just photography because it's all very personal. I remember when I was at uni, and once I graduated, again, I was approaching a lot of photographers to assist them. I always found it quite weird that their work was, you'd go on their website, and not everyone, but some people, you would go and they'd be like, well, this is the personal section, and then this is fashion, and it would look so different to the personal or the document or the travel photography, and I always really struggled with that. I didn't understand why you would do work that looked different, because the context is slightly different.
Do you make time though for personal work, in the sense of work that is uncommissioned, where you are the driving force behind it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I think it's incredibly. It always has been vital, I think. Yeah, no, I make a lot of time for that.
And what tends to motivate you into doing that? Because, when the work that you're doing in fashion, you're shooting in amazing locations and with amazing models and great clothes, and then I know you do a lot of travel type commissions, or you go to different places. So what would it be that you feel is missing that then makes you want to do a personal piece of work?
But like I say, it's all quite personal. So I'm not in my head going, okay, I've just done a fashion shoot, so now I want to go to travel across Russia to do a personal project. I just think in my head, I want to do that for another piece of photography. If do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Because I remember when I first got an agent and commissions started to come up a bit more, and I remember, I think I got asked to do a fashion for the T magazine at the time, and I felt it would, at the time I felt it would be more interesting to do documentary for them, in the sense of going somewhere and taking portraits. So I said to the magazine at the time, if there's ever any documentary projects that you'd like me to do, I'd really love to get involved in that. And I remember it was a trip to Sweden to photograph potato pickers. And I was like, this is a dream. This is absolutely what I want to be doing. And I went by myself, and I had to go to these different farms. It was basically it was an article on Carson's Gold vodka, so obviously potatoes. So I went to all the potato farms, and I photographed potato pickers and landscapes and trees and stuff like that. And it was like a really great, fantastic moment where I kind of had. I think I was using a Pentax actually at the time, and I was like, God, I'm just taking photographs for a magazine on potato farms, and it was like perfect. So, and that's always stuck with me. So I've always continued to, I do a lot for Wall Street Journal documentary work for them, and I've travelled, and I've been so lucky that they've given me the amazing commissions to like Antarctica, and and it all came from that one project in Sweden where it was like, wow, this is also a part of fashion. This is also a part of photography. So I don't know if I've got off your point.
No, it's interesting to hear you say that. I wonder, like, knowing you as a person, I can't, and I've always thought this about you, I can't imagine you going up to someone and asking to take their picture.
Really?
You're quite shy sometimes. How do you do it?
I just ask to take their portrait.
And they never say no?
Yeah, no, of course, all the time. But I mean, because I spent so much time doing it in Preston, for example, that I learned very quickly how to you know, how you can conduct yourself when you, because it is incredibly scary to do. You know, if you're going up to a stranger, your kind of heart is pounding, you know, even now, because it's, you know, you don't know what they're going to say. So I quickly realised that, you know, for example, if I'd go up to a kid in the bus station or whatever, I wouldn't kind of say, God, you look fantastic, can I take your picture? It would more be like, oh, you know, I really like your haircut, you know, or I really like your jacket that you're wearing, can I take a quick portrait? Because I'm doing a project on the bus station. So I kind of learned quite quick. But funnily enough, I learned quite quickly what to say and not to say, but I never thought about that actually probably the way that I am and the way that I, not necessarily the way that I talk, but the way that I sort of conduct myself affects the photo massively. I think, someone said to me, oh, it might have been Jason Evans, he said that, that was Jason, he said, what did he say? And it made complete sense. He said a lot of documentary photographers that he knows, or people that do projects on portraiture, are always quite tall. And he talked about Daniel Meadows, and he's very tall. And he was like, I think that kind of helps when you're approaching people. I don't know, that's what he said.
Did they take you seriously?
I don't know, I can't remember fully what he said, but it just popped into my head.
I think there's something though, it's interesting when you talk about your conduct and how that affects the photograph, because I do wonder if there is something in that gets that response. Because it's like, you know, fashion designers, when they look like their work, you kind of look like your pictures sometimes. Like, and I wonder, no, but I wonder if there is something in that, in the sense of the way people respond, and that, you know, how important is that relationship between you and the subject in terms of the aesthetic?
I think people look like, you know, like you say about fashion designers looking like their work. Well, I guess good fashion designers is in the sense that they're so passionate about what they're doing, and they're so putting absolutely everything into that craft, then naturally, you know, it's going to somehow feel and look like them, because there's so much of what they love about things in there. You know, because that's what we all look like, is what we're, you know, you like your jacket, so you put it on. So it's like, then I think you know, work naturally. You know, it's just like, it's talking about Nigel. Nigel looks like his work, doesn't he? Yeah. It's a perfect example, you know. So it's kind of, I don't think it's necessarily, I've forgotten what I was saying, but yeah.
It's not conscious.
Yeah, it's not a conscious thing. I think it's just because you love so much what you're doing that it's naturally going to come out and kind of look like you.
You said for a long time that you found it hard to take pictures of models, because I know you did that big Preston project where you were taking, as you were saying, the kids in the bus station. And why did you struggle to shoot models? Because straight away you're in your mind, you're in a very different place to what you're familiar with. Like, for example, the stuff that me and Ben were doing, it was much more familiar because it was kids and it was, you know, people that we found. But then once you then move into models, it's a whole, I think in your mind, it's such a different thing. Like, I remember a long time ago, I had a meeting with Joe McKenna, and at the time, you know, it was so fantastic to meet Joe. I think he was kind of, I remember Julie, my agent, saying, you know, you should meet Joe McKenna. So I met him, and he, you know, he really loved all the portraits that I'd taken of kids, but he always said, you know, I don't quite know how we're going to go and photograph a model. And I felt the same way, you know. But then I think just over time, you learn how to get your sensibility across with something as unfamiliar as shooting a model. But there was a period of time, I think, where I think you rely, like I said earlier, you kind of rely on the things that you like to articulate your picture. So when there's a model, for a long time I sort of shut myself off from the model and then put them in front of stuff that I really liked, or put in a poll, and I, you know, looking back, or not looking back, it's not that long ago, and I still do it, but it's sort of, I've very much got so much more interested in you know, as in people's face, you know, the face of a model, the character of a model, the teeth, you know, and letting, I really enjoy that tried to allow that to come across more rather than say relying on a set or relying on a corner of a room to, you know, because for a long time that helped me understand how I could take a photograph of that model.
if that makes sense.
Did you ever worry about drifting into the world of kind of constructed reality, where you were almost trying to make a picture with a big model look like a picture that you'd taken in a bus station or a living room or something?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, I did a story in a bus station on models, but I really loved that, and you know, that was with a stylist called Olivier Rizzo, who's you know, fantastic, but he because he's so articulate and he has a kind of such a deep understanding of what he's trying to do, then it felt very different to a constructed reality. It just did. Whether that came across like that, I don't know. But for me, it was an interesting process. But again, it was you know, you're always learning. So that was a way. Again, I was still. But of course, there is a fine line, and it can, you know. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and it can, if it does drift to that side of things, then I think you're kind of in trouble, because it doesn't. Yeah, constructed reality is. You know, if I'm trying to take a model to look like a kid in a bus station, then I almost think you have to go a million miles away from what it is that you know, and it sort of comes back, if you know what I mean. So for example, I don't know, I'm trying to think of as an example, but you know, like if I'm trying to think of an example that you might know that I've done. You know, if a model's standing there in a funny dress. You know, in Comme des Garçons, not that Comme des Garçons is funny, but in the sense of it being, bad choice of words there, but I guess it's the most unfamiliar sense of fashion. You know,
you can say funny, it's fine. Comme des Garçons is funny.
Yeah, but I did a project with Marie Amélie, and we shot. I think it was Natalie Westling on the edge of a cliff in Comme des Garçons, and I love those photographs. And it's a million miles away from a kid wearing a tracksuit jacket. In a bus station. So and I feel they still feel very much in the same world as the kids in the bus station. But it's knowing and understanding that you have to go a million miles away to then come back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It's interesting, when I interviewed David Sims for this same series, he said that the worst thing for him would be not to be believed. And he said that as someone who takes these massive pictures for big fashion brands, where there is obviously this kind of, there's all this underbelly of commerce, but he still wants that sense of being believed. Do you understand that feeling?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I think any photographer strives to take an honest. I guess that's what he's saying, that he wants the photograph feels honest and believable. And like you say, it can be the most unbelievable situation, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't come across as something believable. And I completely agree with him in that it's very important. And I think any photographer strives to create work that feels, I guess more honest than believable, because I don't really mind if the photo looks not unbelievable, as in like, oh wow, how did they take that? But like unbelievable in that, you know, if you like Natalie in the Comme des Garçons on a cliff edge is unbelievable in the sense that would never happen. But but
there's an honesty to it.
Yeah. And I think that's really that's at the heart of any kind of photograph, I guess, is that honesty comes across, whether it's, you know, like the Walker Evans pictures in the train station or David Sims' photograph, I guess.
Your style's very popular at the moment. Does it annoy you when people copy you?
How do you mean? What you mean? It's
take the tropes and the feel of your photography and make a version of that to get clients or commissions.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying, I guess, and of course, you know, like I said, you take so much time to build something that's yours, in a way. You know, the way that you print is, you know, I've spent so many hours printing and trying to build a palette that I think is interesting. And you know, for a long time, like when I was traveling around England and photographing kids, and you know, not just kids actually, but all types of people, then a lot of places I went to were quite, I wouldn't say grimy, but they're very, very hard places. You know, not in a sense that someone's going to be killed or anything like that, but in it being very cold and the light was very dull. And so when I came to the darkroom to print them, I always wanted everything to have quite an optimism and like a celebration. So I felt that if I printed stuff on the warmer side, you know, with a bit more yellow or whatever, it would bring optimism. So for a long time, I kept playing around with that, a lot of that kind of colour palette and that way of approaching things for a long time. So of course, if I do see where I'm like, that looks very similar to the way that I've printed something in the past, or it's like a somehow. But I think that's the nature of that's the nature of this industry.
Like whoever did it last did it first.
No, but not in sort of like an evil sense, but in that I think you look at photographers that you like or you admire, or they're doing well, or they're getting commissioned, and you naturally are drawn to that, and then your photography kind of comes out a little bit like that, and then you kind of move through it, and then you build your own language. And it's like, I guess it's like in a funny way, it's like being a kid where you'll start talking like your parents, and then you'll have your own voice. So I guess it just naturally happens a lot. I guess there's a fine line where some people just don't move away from it, and it's a bit of a joke. I'm not saying my photographs, but you see it all the time where someone's pictures always look like somebody else's. But so there's a fine line, and that's someone else's issue, I guess. But
are you worried about because you've been very successful very quickly and you're very young, and are you worried about having longevity in your career and being able to sort of have other styles and be known for trying different things? Because your pictures are so identifiable, they really, I'm not saying that, I mean that in a really positive way, like they have this sensibility, but that can be difficult in a way because there's a certain expectation of you when you walk into a shoot, I presume. Yeah, I mean, longevity, of course, I actually think is very important. It's really important. And I don't mean longevity in the sense of, well, you're being commissioned every 5 minutes to do something, but just like the longevity of your work, I guess you don't know, because you're not 20 years ahead, you can't jump and see if your work has longevity. So I think, I like to think that it's a steady, I feel at the moment in my head that this kind of very considered, steady trying to move forward is that's what I'm trying to do, because of course if I sit down and go, okay, so today I'm going to try an on-camera flash because I'm fed up of my own sensibility, then that will never work. I think that it's just a very slow, it's like moving away from the corner of a room to then, I did a couple of shoots recently, one for W with Edward and a thing with Joe McKenna that I love, and it feels very, for me, it might not come across like that, but it's very different to what I've done in the past, but it's not a million miles away from that, but it's just in my own head. Even the sense of, for a long time I loved a camera on a tripod, whereas now I really like kind of running around like a madman a little bit. So it's sort of like, but then I still come back to that, and I know, so it's like it's not a huge difference at all. So I think it's I think what's really important is a slow, find slow steps forward. Would you say that you're a technically skilled photographer?
I mean, no, I guess not in the sense that I always think for some reason if when someone says technical, I think of like a room full of flashers. I don't know why, which I don't necessarily do. But then there's all different types of technical things like printing. Of course, I print a lot, so in that side of things I feel quite confident. But I guess in the classical sense I wouldn't be that much of a technical. I like to think. It's funny because I remember when I was walking around a lot and looking at light, you start to, it's a very basic understanding, but you'll know that, at this time of the day, if I stand on this side of the bus station, it's going to be nice, soft sunlight. And then if I go on that side of the bus station, it's very normal, north-facing light with no sun on it. So it's going to be very two different photographs. But when you're first taking pictures, you don't really think about stuff like that. You're just taking pictures. So I started to think about light a lot more. So now I guess I know that if I put that girl by that window in that light, it's going to look, because I'm shooting on film, I can't see anything. So I know through doing. And
it's funny, you talked about printing and shooting on film, and like, would you say that you're nostalgic in your approach sometimes, because you're not massively embracing of new photographic technologies, and it seems like that's quite natural. It's not like like a sort of an oppressive nostalgic sentiment, but
yeah, I never see using film as being nostalgic at all. I always think that's really weird, because it's not nostalgia. It's not nostalgia.
It's just another technique.
I mean, it's photography. It's not like it's not like I'm going, okay, well, Irving Penn used film, so I'm going to use film, and in a nostalgic way like that, if that makes sense. It's just a form of photography that I've learnt, and all through doing and being a photographer, and the people that I've met, like Nick, let me use his dark room and all that kind of stuff. Then that's just the process that's happened to me, and it's not about being nostalgic at all. It's just a thing that's worked for me, and I'm not against digital. It's just it's just a way of photography that hasn't, like when I was at university, the first camera I got given was the camera that I use now. There's a medium format, it was an RB67. Obviously it's not the same physical because that's broken, but it's the same model, but a newer version. So I spent so much time fiddling around with that camera and learning everything about it. Then when I graduated from university, I didn't want to then go and use a digital camera, because I spent so much time learning this. So it wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't nostalgia at all. It was more just because I'd spent so much time learning this object that's what I'm going to use for my work. If that makes sense.
That does make sense. There are so many young people that really dream of being photographers and want to be photographers, and why you? Why do you think that people have responded so well to your work? Why have you made it and others try so hard to? Why do people like you, Jamie?
Do they? I don't know, really. I mean, I guess who's to say what doing well is and stuff, I guess, because a photographer that doesn't shoot for any magazine could be doing incredibly well in terms of how they feel about their own practice. So I guess it's like, I don't know, really.
You touched on an interesting idea there, though, which is like, what is your idea of success? Because you were basically saying if someone's happy with their own work, there are amazing photographers who, I was with Nigel Chaffin the other day, and we were talking about Peter Mitchell, and we were talking about photographers who produce this incredible work, but aren't, necessarily in vogue in the sense of in fashion, and physically in vogue as well. What is your idea of success? Could you be one of those people who's just proud of the work that they're making, or do you have these certain things that you want to achieve, like goalposts or something?
I think you kind of said it, as in that I tell myself, I guess, that you're successful if you like your own work, and you feel like you're producing work that's strong and good, and you get yourself across in your work, and that's a success. But I actually think, because of the nature of, like we were talking about things being competitive and all that kind of stuff, that I think a part of you naturally thinks, well, if I do that, if I do this, or if I do that, then that makes me a success, which I think is a dangerous game in a way, because ultimately I think what you'll ultimately be happy with is, or you'll feel like a success when you really fully believe in what you're doing, not that you're in vogue.
Do you fully believe in what you're doing?
Sometimes I do, and then sometimes I don't. So it's like I said about it going up and down. I think you put yourself in a situation where sometimes it's really tricky, and some people may not believe in what you're doing, so then there's that struggle, or vice versa, or so then you feel kind of, or I sometimes feel a bit down about things, and not, well, this can't be photography, this can't be what this is about. But then suddenly you'll do a shoot, or you'll go away somewhere and you'll find a person or whatever, and you'll be like, fuck, this is photography, and now I feel like I'm doing the right thing again. So, and then it will go back to something, I guess it's just an up and down nature.
Does it bother you if people don't like the work? If you show it to someone you respect and they're not enamoured with it, do you find criticism difficult? Because photographers aren't actually so much like designers in that they don't get this like seasonal critique of their work. Like, you know, you get the show review, you don't get the campaign review.
Yeah.
So I guess you don't get that much feedback, but do you seek that out in people, and does it bother you?
No, I think sometimes I do seek it out, which is not great. As in, I sometimes, you know, it's like there's a guy in my, Lee, who owns the darkroom in which I print. I'm always asking him, oh, what do you think of this colour? What do you think of this exposure? You know, it's like and that's, you know, and I've printed, and I always find myself like, why can't you just trust yourself, Jamie?
Because would you change it if you didn't like it anyway? Probably not.
No, I do and I don't. Like, as in, I'll change it and go, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But he does, you know, as in, it's sort of like, yeah, so I kind of, yeah, and, you know, I send pictures to my agent or whoever, my friend, and say, you know, Adam, I sort of say, what do you think of this? And sometimes I'm thinking, why am I relying on someone else to tell me this is good or bad? But I think you just do it as a natural, I mean, I'm sure not everyone does, but I kind of fallen into a little bit of a thing of where I kind of, you know, I show my dad a lot of stuff, and if he says no, I go like, oh God, it must be crap then. You know what I mean? Like, and it's just absurd because people's sensibilities are so different. So it's like you can't rely on anyone but yourself in a way to understand your work. You've just got to believe in it. So sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, I guess.
And talk to me, like a really pivotal person in your career. You talked about Benjamin Bruno, the stylist, who obviously works very closely with J.W. Anderson, Jonathan Anderson, the designer who does J.W. Anderson and Loewe, and they've been a big part of your work because, you know, you're very synonymous with sort of their work together. I know you've worked with lots of other brands, people like that, but talk to me about Jonathan and building that aesthetic, because he's someone that so understands the importance in fashion imagery in building a brand, like almost as much as the clothing in terms of its importance. Yeah,
I mean, I started to work with Jonathan on his first campaign because me and Ben were working together and Ben became his consultant, I guess. So then it all sort of fell into place quite easily and simply at that time. As in, we, you know, me and Ben were working so closely together, and we'd already did 3 stories from About Town, and we were in a fantastic place because we were working with M&M Paris, who were art directing the magazine, and they had a great ability to kind of let me and Ben do what we wanted, and they never questioned or asked. You know, we sent them the pictures, and it was fantastic, and so we felt quite confident in what we were doing because, you know, it felt great. So we then took what we were building there and brought it into J.W. Anderson and Loewe to an extent. So at the beginning, it all felt quite natural. It was a natural thing to do. So when the campaign came up, Jonathan kind of left me and Ben to come up with what we thought would be good. And I remember us talking about the inside of the texture of an inside of a car when that came the campaign. Like, it was so simple, but so we kind of built it like that. And for a long time, when the J.W. Anderson campaign came up, but Jonathan was great in the sense that he let me and Ben kind of get on with it. And I think, you know, of course, some, you know, as in it's up and down, but I think, you know, we built a really great language for what Jonathan was about, so it felt right. So, you know, and also that was the first kind of big fashion campaign that I did. So from there, it was a great springboard to then, okay, so this is how you do a fashion campaign almost, and how it should be. And, you know, and then obviously when Loewe came along, I think the first thing we did was a catalogue for the menswear, and we basically kind of took what we were doing from About Town, and we photographed boys on the beach, and we took that into Loewe. So again, it was a very natural thing, and it was a very good foundation to then moving forward.
But you must feel more of an ownership of the sense of the sort of the J.W. Anderson aesthetic, because, you know, you were so pivotal in building it. It must be very different to if you go into, like, you know, Calvin Klein and shoot a picture for them. You haven't helped develop the visual language, whereas I guess because Jonathan's brand was a smaller, young brand. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because you, I think as a photographer, I mean, I do anyway, and maybe this is not a good thing, but I never really want to go a million miles away from anything I've done, as in, I don't really want to go into, you know, a brand and do something completely different, because I want it to look like my photograph, but because of the people that you're working with and because of the sensibility of the team and the designer, you take that on board, and then naturally the work looks different because you're taking on many different. So, you know, when I did a Miu Miu campaign with Olivier for Miuccia Prada, of course, you know, it's not a million miles away because it's the same photographer, but it is in the visual language because, you know, Olivier is very different to Benjamin and Miuccia Prada is very different to Jonathan, so it naturally moves apart. But I'd like to think that it still very much feels like a photograph that I respect and want to take. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It's interesting, when Glenn Latchford was here, I asked him if he felt like, you know, the next picture he took was going to be his best, and he said absolutely not, there was no chance, and that the way that the industry is shaped at the moment, it doesn't lend itself to brilliant image making because of the commercial pressures. And I wonder how you deal with that pace and that pressure, and do you feel like your next image is always going to be your best?
I really strive for it to be, really genuinely do, but it varies because of course when you're in a situation and you've got like 31 looks to do in a day, sometimes, you know, for Loewe, that's kind of what we do because it's a different thing because there's a catalogue and it kind of feels good because we've built it from the start, so you're on board with it, but you're naturally never gonna. It's very different to then doing an editorial where you've got, you know, it's just different. So you're not necessarily going to take your best ever photograph, but then I really do strive to try and do a good job. And I think that I think there is still room for great photographs, actually. Yeah, I do, because I think that, because there just is, I think there is, and I think that
I guess you haven't known any different as well. Like Glenn worked in the 90s and, you know, knows what the industry once was like, but this is how you've always known it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the perfect point. Is that I don't know any different, and that, you know, I guess I've been shooting for like 6 years or something like that. So it's a very short. I'm sure, you know, as in, I'll probably feel different, but I mean, yeah, right now I don't know any different, and you know, I still believe that there's room to make great work for sure. You know, yeah, I really do.
We're talking a little bit about the pace here, and like, it's interesting. I interview a lot of fashion designers who are about your age for this series, and they always talk about the pressure that they're under and the cycle of fashion, and they talk about it being really hard and it can be really lonely. And you know, how do you like? Do you find that? Are you happy? Do you like your life?
No, of course it is quite lonely when you're printing in the dark room all day and you're off somewhere by yourself, or yeah, of course, but I think that's just, again, human nature to feel a little bit like that. But I feel like the pace of fashion is slowing down. I don't know. I feel, yeah, I don't, maybe it isn't, but I think that you choose what you want to do, I guess. So, you know, I've tried to become incredibly selective, I guess, in the sense, you know, not in a bad way, but just in a sense that I try and give myself time to print a project, to then have time to think about it and not take on too much, and just really try and understand and have the time to have a conversation with people and to talk to them and sit down and, you know, not just, you know, because it's so important to talk about stuff. And I think that, yeah, so if you give yourself more time and you take on less, and that gives you more breathing space to read more, or to look at books, or to, you know, to talk to people and figure it all out.
Figure it all out.
Yeah.
Jamie, thank you very much.
Pleasure.